Brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Sulky Threads. Express yourself with Sulky and create with confidence. Our exclusive fabric partners. Be sure to look for their newest lines of fabric.
Hi, I'm June Dudley with Quiltmaker Magazine, and this is Quiltmaker's Block Network. Today we're going to look at Bird of Happiness, block number 503. This block was designed by Gretchen Gibbons from Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks, Volume 6. Today in the studio we have special guest Sara Gallegos. Sara is a Baby Lock representative, and Sara, why don't you tell us how you're going to make Bird of Happiness today?
I'm really excited to show you today how I use some of the cool features on the Baby Lock Unity, like the sensor pen and the needle guide beam, to perfectly space and position and size the decorative stitches for the applique design.
That sounds wonderful. To make this block, you need one background fabric, you need assorted prints for the applique, and you need some green tone-on-tones for the leaves. All of the cutting dimensions and fabric requirements can be found on your screen. If you need to write this down, you can pause the video.
Here I've traced all of the pattern pieces onto fusible web, and I've prepared to press them onto my fabrics. You want to make sure that when you press it onto the fabric that you press it onto the wrong side, not the right side, or it's not going to look exactly right. Once you've done that, you can trim around your shapes, and then we're ready to place them onto our background fabric. I've prepared my background piece by creasing lines into the fabric just as the instructions tell you to do, by folding it diagonally and vertically. And then I've used the template and just drawn on the shape for my tree branch and my little stems that I'm going to be stitching. I've backed the fabric with a piece of no-show mesh stabilizer, just so that when I start stitching those decorative stitches, my fabric's not going to bunch up beneath my threads. So here I am at the home screen on my Baby Lock Unity, and I'm going to select Utility and Decorative Stitches. And it gives me a basic selection of decorative stitches that I can play with. I'm going to select a triple straight stitch. And I prefer to stitch this with my needle in the center position, so I can very easily modify that just by touching the width icon here. See it move along the screen. And 3.5 is center needle position on this machine. Another really cool feature that I'd like to turn on is the needle guide beam, this icon here. And that is going to give me an LED laser beam showing along my fabric as I stitch that gives me a really nice placement marking. Notice that it's also at center needle position. It's actually right beneath my stitching, and that just lets me know that as I stitch, my threads are going to be lining up right on top of where my guide beam is aligning. Another couple of handy features that I like to activate when I'm doing this type of stitching is needle down position. Whenever I'm sewing and I stop to pivot my fabric or reposition my hands, the presser foot will lift slightly for me, the needle will stay down in the fabric, and then as I begin stitching, it's automatically going to drop that foot back down again, and I'm ready to sew. I'm also going to turn on the automatic tie-off and thread cutter, so when I get to the end of my seam, I can simply touch my reverse button and the machine will automatically lock in my stitch and trim my thread for me. Another favorite feature of the Baby Lock Unity for this type of decorative stitching is the adjustable speed control. With this dial right here, I can slow the machine way down so it stitches very slowly, I can speed it up, or what I like to do for this type of stitching is to set it right in the middle at a medium speed, so regardless of how hard I put my foot on the foot control, it's only going to go at a medium speed. So here I've positioned my needle right at the beginning of my stem, and you can see my guide beam sticking straight out toward me on my fabric. It is a straight line, and we're going to be stitching a very curvy stem, so my goal as I sew is going to be that the guide beam is meeting my line right about at the toe of my foot. And now I'm ready to begin. And this triple straight stitch sews back and forth over itself 3 different times to form a very nice, thick, more of a hand look stitch. I've stopped because I've gotten to a very curvy part of my stem, and my presser foot has lifted, my needle is down, and I'm gently pivoting my fabric beneath the foot. I start again, and that presser foot drops right back down for me. And I try to make sure that when I stop and start, I'm always stopping at the end of that triple stitch, so it goes forward, backward, forward once more, and that's when I stop to pivot. Now as I'm stitching, I'm passing by all of these little branches. I'm going to do the main portion of the stem, and then I'm going to come back in and finish off all those little extra pieces. And now that I'm just about to the end of my stem, I'm going to activate that tie off by touching the reverse button, and the machine takes a few locking stitches and then cuts my thread and lifts the presser foot, and I'm finished. Now that my stem is stitched, I'm ready to follow the placement guideline and position all of my applique pieces onto my background fabric. I simply remove the paper backing off of the fusible interfacing and place those pieces right on, and I'm ready to stitch them down. So I'm finished with my triple straight stitch, and now I want to move on to a blanket stitch to stitch down the body of my bird. I can just arrow down, and there's my blanket stitch. I feel a little more comfortable stitching with the straight edge of that stitch on the right, so I'm going to mirror image it side to side. And I can move my guide beam position over to the right, so that again I can utilize that guide beam to sew straight. And I'm just quickly going to adjust the length and the width of the stitch a bit too, because that's a pretty large blanket stitch right now. I'm going to put it to a width of 3. I'm going to set it to a length of 2.0. I like a nice short stitch length so that I can easily pivot around the curves of the bird. And now I'm ready to stitch. So I'm stitching my blanket stitch, and how this stitch is formed is it does a nice little row of straight stitches right along the edge of my bird, and then with every stitch it just takes a little vertical bite to the left of the fabric, and that's what gives you that blanket look. Again, I'm just kind of trying to follow so that my guide beam stays close to the bird. I'm getting to a real curvy part right here. And I try to always make sure that I stop to pivot when I'm on the side of that stitch. Now that I've finished stitching the bird, I don't need the blanket stitch anymore. I'm going to switch to a stem stitch. I'm just going to arrow back up here. And here's my stem stitch. It's just like a little wobbly zigzag stitch. You can see that it's very tiny on the screen, so I'm going to increase the length to 3 and the width to 2. And I'll just move that guide beam positioning over to the center again. And now I'm ready to stitch some of my flower petals. So now I'm just stitching my little zigzag stitch around my leaf. And I like to stop to pivot whenever the needle is on the right outside edge of my applique shape. Now that I'm getting to the end, I'll touch my reverse button to activate that tie off and thread cut. And that one's done. Now I'm ready to try another decorative stitch on the machine, and this one's going to allow me to utilize my sensor pen. So I'll select a standard zigzag stitch, and this time I want to set it to a smaller width, but instead of taking the time to test the width on the pieces over and over again, I can very easily use my sensor pen to set the width of the stitch. So I'll touch my sensor pen icon and the stitch width icon, and it asks me to touch 2 points on my fabric. The first one is going to be the very edge of my stitching, the edge of my applique shape. It recognizes where I've touched. I'm going to touch OK. And now I'll touch a second point just inside of my applique shape. And it recognizes that it needs to stitch a 2.5 millimeter zigzag stitch to get the desired look. So I'll touch OK again, and I'm ready to sew. I just have so much fun playing with all the decorative stitches on the machines. You can do all sorts of fun things. This little stem stitch is one of my favorites for applique because it's like a little wobbly zigzag. It kind of does remind me of the edges of an actual leaf. It's not quite as straight as a true zigzag stitch. You just get that little bit of wobbliness, and I think it looks cute. And you can play with the different stitch lengths and widths to get the look that you're going for. And again, I try to stop and pivot when I see that my needle is on its right swing at the edge of my applique shape. And that adjustable speed to slow the machine down really helps me. And once again, I've gotten to the end, so I'll touch that reverse key, and it ties off and trims my thread. And here is our finished stitched Bird of Happiness block.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for stopping by today.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for stopping by Quiltmaker's Block Network. You can find Bird of Happiness and 99 other fantastic blocks in Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks Volume 6. Hope to see you again soon at Quiltmaker's Block Network. Today in the studio we have Sara Gallegos. She's a baby lock representative. And Sarah, why don't you tell us how you're going to
rock our world.
Rock our world today.